Welcome to So and So, brought to you by Bernina, made to create. I'm Meg Goodman, and you're about to enjoy a casual conversation with special members of the sewist and quilting community. A conversation about how they got started, what inspires them, what excites them, and their connection to this community. This is a very special episode of So and So, focusing on body positivity and plus-size sewing. Elise Voss-Cantor, marketing manager at Bernina of America and a friend of So and So, takes us into a Facebook Live conversation with Christy Burcham, who's Director of Education and Training for Bernina of America, and Aaronica Cole, an entrepreneur and owner of the Needle and the Bell in Atlanta. Christy grew up around sewing as her mom was a tailor. She started working at a local Bernina store, and after college she worked for Oklahoma Embroidery Supply and Design in marketing and education until she started at Bernina of America in 2017. In her role at Bernina, Christy's responsible for leading and training the teams that support Bernina dealers throughout the U.S., as well as a team producing educational content for sewists from beginners to advanced users. To Christy, sewing is both her career and a personal passion, as she loves sewing and quilting both for their practical elements and for the pure joy of creation. It's important to her that sewists everywhere have the tools and inspiration to hone their craft and get the most enjoyment from their time with their machine. As a plus-size sewist herself, Christy notes that she's seen the sewing industry adapt over the years to be more accommodating to sewists of all sizes. Aaronica Cole is a mom of three, married to her very own McDreamy, and runs her own business, The Needle and the Bell. Sewing wasn't always something that she was passionate about, as she wasn't impressed with her first project, a drawstring bag. After taking many years off from sewing while navigating a divorce, she fell back in love with the art. She's self-taught, and she focuses on apparel, though she's slowly dabbling in and becoming very fond of quilting as well. To her, learning to sew is one of the most empowering things ever. She says you take unformed pieces of fabric and create garments, bags, quilts, and more that have the power to last lifetimes while telling stories. She thinks it's never too late to learn this skill that truly keeps on giving. Sewing has really given her the ability to no longer shrink to fit in, because now she can make what she wants for herself. So now let's join this empowering and informative conversation to learn tips and tricks for plus-size sewing and hear how Christy and Aaronica both feel about the world of plus sizes and positivity and feeling good about who you are and how you look.
Hello, Christy. Thank you for coming on. You have a lot of great tips to share together with Aaronica, all about body positive sewing today. Our audience was super excited to learn about this topic and learn about your tips and tricks. So, Aaronica and Christy, the stage is yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Elise. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so excited. Aaronica, I'm so glad you could join me for this. I was so excited when you said yes when I asked you about this topic. So welcome. So we are going to dive into some really practical tips and tricks in this presentation today, but I also want to kind of start with just a little bit of background information on ourselves, and then also why we decided to talk about this topic today. So I'll start with you, Aaronica. Can you tell us a little bit about your sewing background, how you got started?
Yeah, of course. So just recapping, I started sewing when I was 13 because I had very busy hands, which I still have. And honestly, this is also why I've gotten my middle child into sewing too. But I was deconstructing many things in my house. And so my mom was like, it's time to put you in a class so that you can create versus destruct. So she put me into a class, and I thought it was just so lame. I did not have fun at all. I ended up just with a little drawstring backpack, and I was like, this is awful. This is all we can do. I did not stick with classes, and I had a little Gordon Gartrell moment at home with my brother, and I made him a shirt. It looked awful, and he wore it proudly, and he was like, look at what my little sister made me. And then I essentially stopped sewing for a little bit of time. And then I was going through my divorce from my practice marriage. My mom was like, you know what, being creative will definitely be a great outlet for you. And so she gifted me a new sewing machine. And I started sewing again then. I was making some like little appliques for onesies. And then I decided to take a chance and I made my New Year's Eve dress. And that dress stayed together with a prayer and like some well-placed thread because I had no idea what I was doing when I put it together. There were zippers. I'm 100% certain that my zipper was installed incorrectly, but we made it through the night. We brought the new year in wearing a me-made dress. And I put sewing down for a little bit more because then I got pregnant with my oldest child and I just didn't have the time for it at that point in time. But then after I got pregnant with my second child and I was married to my husband at that point in time, and I decided to upcycle my things. My children tend to just grow up and they're like these little bean poles. And instead of buying my oldest daughter new clothes, I just began to upcycle her pieces. And I was turning like little leggings and sweatpants into cute little skirts and really extending the life of these things, which I loved. And I continued to do that through maternity wear. So I would thrift for clothes and then I would just turn it into some maternity clothes because I just thought it was much better, way more cost efficient, and it gave life to some clothes that were otherwise discarded. And after I had my second child, I just could not stop sewing. So that is my story. What about you, Christy?
Oh, that's so awesome, Aaronica. And I love following you on Instagram, by the way. So for our friends out there, we'll talk later about how you can connect with us. But I love watching all the things that you made. It's fantastic. So I got started. I have actually been in the Bernina family a long time. I worked for a dealership when I was in high school. And so I've been around sewing all the time. And my mom was a tailor. And so I was around sewing when I was little. You know, there were always people in the house coming in, learning, getting custom made pieces. So I was around sewing a lot, but I really didn't sew a lot of clothes for myself at first because I was mostly interested in quilting and embroidery. And that was where I really put a lot of my time and effort was in quilting and embroidery. So it has only been in the last 2 or 3 years that I've really made an effort to sew clothes for myself. I knew how, I've done it before, but it's only been in the last couple of years I've really been inspired to do so more. So, and of course, I'm getting a lot of my inspiration from people I follow online and getting excited about new things. So before we dive into some tips, I just have one more question for you. You know, we talked when we were deciding about doing this presentation, we want to call it curvy sewing or plus size sewing, or, we talked about body positive sewing. And I want to know kind of like what term resonates with you and why do you think it's important to even talk about it?
So I resonate with both curvy as well as plus size sewing. And I really resonate with plus size because I feel like that's a more mainstream term. And I want to make sure that when I talk about plus size, that people are very clear about what I'm talking about, right? Because in truth, you can be a smaller person and still be curvy, right? You can be a size 4 and still have hips and breasts and be curvy. So I feel like plus size sewing really does do a better job of describing what I do because I am a bigger body and I am a plus size body. Yes, I do have curves, but I am a plus size sewist.
Yeah, absolutely. The other day when we were talking about this, you brought up something I thought was so fantastic. We were talking about being body positive, and you brought up the term like body neutrality. And I thought that was fantastic, especially as it comes to sewing, because when it comes to like being positive, sometimes we're not all in that place, that we are feeling positive about our body, but that doesn't mean we don't have one. And,
right.
We want to make clothes that fit us now. And I think that's so important.
It really is, especially because I feel like society really makes us have worth based on our bodies, but we all have them. We all have a body. Some of us, like I said previously, are differently abled bodies. Our bodies look different, but we all have them. And they actually play no part in our worth at all. So, it's time to really celebrate wherever you would like to celebrate, or just simply acknowledge or not acknowledge, because we all know that they exist.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's get into some nuts and bolts about sewing for a plus size or larger bodies. One of the things that people ask me is, where on earth do you find patterns that fit you? So where are some of your favorite places to get patterns from?
I am purely a PDF sewist. I'm probably just starting to get back into some tissue designs. But I shop at Patterns for Pirates, Made for Mermaids. They're actually sisters and sister companies. Petite Stitchery has amazing. I love Petite Stitchery because not only do they have plus size for adults, but they also have plus size for children too. So that's really important because my son is very thick, like he's solid. So finding, like, he's not long and lean like my oldest is. So that's really important for me sewing for him. So English, which is normally known as a fabric company, but they also do patterns. Their patterns go up to, I want to say 10x. And I love that they have really fully embraced all bodies, because they also start out really small. Friday Patterns, Chelsea, who owns Friday Patterns, she makes such amazing patterns. And I love that she is really receptive to the feedback from her testers. I've done a couple of tests for her, and really receptive to how it fits on a real body versus just a block, right? Another favorite of mine, and this is a new pattern company for me, is it's called Lore, Lore Patterns. And I just did a test for the Lonnie pattern, and such a fun pattern. And I love it because it's a style that's typically reserved for standard sizes. And so now we've got plus size women, or plus size people who are out here showcasing, their corset style tops, and I'm loving it. And one of my new to me designers is Amy Nicole Studios, and she has some really fun play suits and dresses, especially for like this upcoming warm weather. Like, it's 80 degrees in Atlanta and it just hit March. So these are definitely patterns that I plan on sewing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I have several of the ones that you mentioned I really love. A few others that come to mind. True Bias is a great pattern company. Helen's Closet. And also, I'm a big fan. I want to give a huge plug to Seamwork. I love Seamwork. I have the subscription, and I collect all of the Seamwork patterns. I haven't made them all, but I have collected all of them. Every time they come out with a new one, I've got it. And but for me, part of it, I think too, is finding patterns that tend to fit you, that you don't have to make as many alterations for. Yes. And for me, the Seamwork patterns tend to fit my body pretty well. So they don't require as many alterations for me. So I'm a big fan of that. And also the Seamwork patterns, they have a lot of classes for some of their patterns. So if you're just getting started, that's a big one. So I know we passed up on the screen that we have a blog post on wealsew.com today that lists some of these places in the link. So if you didn't write them down quite fast enough, you can go to that. Just go to wealsew.com. It's the first post today, and it's got a list of some of these pattern companies that we were talking about. So speaking of patterns, do you find that you adjust your patterns very much?
Yes, all the time. My bust measurement is, so even from my upper bust to my full bust, as well as my under bust, there's a size difference because I am a petite measurement up here. But I range between 3 to 4 sizes, ranging from my bust to my hip area. And so I'm always making adjustments. And I find that making the adjustments makes it so that it looks like a really, really amazing garment for your body. And it's kind of few and far between if I don't have to make adjustments, honestly.
Yeah. I tend to adjust a lot of things too, because I'm also smaller on top than in my hips. And so I do find I have to adjust things, or, if a dress, I'm definitely going to have to grade between two sizes, between the top and the bottom. Sometimes that means buying two patterns. If I'm buying a pre-printed pattern, I've had to buy two patterns, one that fits the top and one that fits the bottom, and then grade in between them. But, you do what it takes to make it fit you. So that I do find a lot. What are some common adjustments that you find you do besides just grading between sizes?
So my most common adjustment is definitely a full booty or bottom adjustment. And so essentially what that does is it kind of gives you a little bit of extra fabric in the back. And I have to do it for both pants as well as skirts, because like you said on the last time, there's a significant length difference when I'm wearing skirts. And then also because my hip measurement, while it is larger than my bust measurement, it's not actually my hips that are wider, because I'm not actually hippie. I have junk in my trunk, right? I've got a caboose back there. So it's normally that full, either the full booty adjustment or a sway back adjustment, like in dresses, that will get that fit perfect. Another adjustment that I've recently become comfortable with after having my third child has been the full tummy adjustment, which is essentially doing the same thing that you're doing for the full bust adjustment that you're doing in the front pant or skirt. Well, really just the pant area for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do a full bottom adjustment too. And yeah, we talked about the other day, how do you know what adjustment you need? One is just watching a lot of tutorials and learning, but just a simple one. How do you know if you need a full bottom adjustment? If you find that when you, even in ready to wear, when you buy shorts, they're a lot shorter in the back than they fit in the hips, but they're shorter in the back than they are in the front, you may definitely want to consider a full bottom adjustment. It can really help. So that's something you can search for. There's all kinds of great tutorials out there. And, I think when people hear about doing adjustments, it scares them off a little bit. Like, oh, I don't know how to alter a pattern, but the tutorials that you can find are so easy to follow, and it's not as scary as you might think. Have you found that to be true?
Absolutely. And honestly, you can do a lot of trial and error, right? So before I knew about the sway back adjustment and before I knew about full booty adjustments, I was putting crescent darts in the lower back area, and it was a well-fitting garment. It was a little bit more tedious and harder to get right. But, because I was just doing it with the sewing machine, I had enough time and I could easily break out my seam tear and make those necessary adjustments. But I do think that it does get easier with time, especially as you get to know your pattern designers. In fact, someone asked, how do you know when you have to make the adjustments? Do you make a muslin? Yes, I do make a muslin. However, typically between designers, right, they're using the same sizing block. So if I have to make this adjustment, say on a pair of pants from Patterns for Pirates, if I have to make the adjustment on the linen loungers, chances are I'm going to have to make the same adjustment on the pajama bottoms because they're of the same block. They're both woven. So that's something that I keep in mind when I'm switching designers. If I've never made them before, then I will make a muslin, and I work really hard to make wearable muslins because, muslins, they do contribute to textile waste, and I do try to make sure that I'm sustainably sewing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love the idea of a wearable muslin as well. Making something that you can still wear if it works out, but you don't start with the expensive fabric. You start with something that you got for on the bargain table, but you're still going to be able to use it. So yeah, absolutely, it's great to make a muslin. Sometimes I don't make a muslin if I'm feeling pretty confident in how something's going to fit, especially if it's knit. I don't always make a muslin because there's some forgiveness in the fabric itself.
Forgiveness.
Yeah, but if it's something I'm investing in, I'll definitely make a muslin.
I mean, Christy, you and your $50 a yard fabric. I know you're making muslins first.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about that the other day. Sometimes if you're spending $50 a yard on your fabric, you definitely want to make a muslin on that first. But you don't have to spend that much on fabric. You can find good quality fabric at other rates too, which we'll talk about fabric in just a minute. So we did have a question pop up there. Oh, hi, Julian. A question pop up there about an arm side adjustment. I haven't done a lot of arm side adjustments. Have you had to do that?
I haven't, because mine typically fit perfectly. But for the arm side, okay, so I am always mispronouncing this, but we'll just say that you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's very much so like a slash and spread to get that adjustment there. Mm-hmm. And then you want to make sure that you're doing the exact same distance on your sleeve as well. Mm-hmm. And it'll line up perfectly.
Yeah. And when you go to search for that, if you're searching for an arm side adjustment, it's spelled ARMSCYE. So, that's one of those words you're like, oh, I had no idea how to spell that. So it's a good one to learn. Okay, so next thing I want to talk about is fabric. Everybody always wants to know, where do you get fabric? And especially garment fabric, it's a little harder to find. So what are your favorite sources for fabric?
So English, in fact, one of the things that I shared with Christy before I hopped on here was that I had to move a big box of fabric that I had just gotten in from So English over so that it was out of the way, so that you guys only see the pretties behind me versus the mess that's on the floor. So English is definitely one of my favorite places, namely because I started buying from them probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And I bought my very first bundle, which I loved because it kind of got me out of my comfort zone for the fabrics that I was normally buying. And I really like the bundle options. But I also buy from, there's a group that's on Facebook, and it's called Freckled Fabrics. Some of my favorite fabrics have come from there. The owner, Leslie, she just goes down to the LA district and buys certain cuts. And then, so it's kind of one of a kind. I also really like Millie Mae Fabrics, as well as Amelia Lang Design. And of course, Melanated Fabrics, that's actually local to Atlanta, but you can still order online from them.
Yeah.
Awesome. Pretty much all of my fabrics behind me are from all of those places.
Yeah, exactly. I'm wearing fabric from So English today. This is
I recognize that.
One of my favorites. I bought this in a bundle too, which I love, buying the fabrics in bundles, because it does kind of get you to try new things. I do have a little thing I'm going to show about this sweater. So I have a little heart patch that I sewed on here, and this is because when I cut it out, I cut a little slice right in the sleeve with my rotary cutter when I was cutting it out. So if you're getting new to sewing and you're like, oh my gosh, what if I make a mistake? I promise you there is always some way to fix it. And sometimes it ends up being really fun, because I added little hearts in, because then I added these hearts. I added the heart on the back of the sweater. So, there's always a design opportunity if you make a mistake.
Yes.
But speaking of fabrics, a couple other fabric sources, of course, your local dealer may carry fabric, and even some Bernina dealers who don't carry a lot of garment fabric will carry some, especially to go along with classes they might be offering. They may have some fabric available to you. So give your local dealer a check. But also there's finefabrics.com. Blackbird Fabrics is another good source. Someone asked the other day where you could get a good 100% cotton denim, and Blackbird Fabrics is another location. I see we have a question about if all the shops are in the U.S. Most of them are. I do think Blackbird Fabrics is Canada, but they do ship into the U.S. Oak Fabrics is another one that's actually based out of Chicago. Used to have an in-person store, but now they're just online. Another great garment fabric source. So lots of great places to get fabrics. So. Okay, so next thing I wanted to ask you about is, as a beginner, if somebody asks you, I'm just getting started, where should I start? Where would you recommend someone get started if they're just learning to sew for their plus size body?
So it's funny that you asked that, because my dealer had suggested that I start out teaching a t-shirt pattern, because they said that would be easy. I personally started out with pegs. I started out with leggings because I was like, this is something that I wear at the time. It was part of my mom uniform because I was an absolute work from home mom and I wore leggings for everything. And so I started out with the freebie patterned pegs because I was like, I don't have to have that much of an investment in here. I made quite a few before I actually made like a wearable pair because when you're dealing with leggings, you have to make sure that it is 4-way, 100% stretch. And I neglected that little fact. So I still think that leggings are the way to start, though.
Yeah, leggings are great. And that would be my suggestion too. Start with something knit. And a lot of times people, especially if you're a quilter, like I was, if you're a quilter, you're like, oh my gosh, knit. It's like a 4-letter word. I don't want to learn how to sew with knits. It's so scary. But there are, knit is very forgiving. It's forgiving in fit. It's really pretty easy to sew. And because it is stretchy, a lot of times the pattern pieces are simpler. So there's not as many pieces and not as much detail work in the sewing. So a t-shirt really is pretty easy. It sounds scary, but it's really pretty easy to do. Another one I would definitely recommend is this, what I'm wearing today. This is the Fall in Love cardigan from Sew to Grow. And you can make it, even if you're a total beginning sewer, you can absolutely make it in a day. And if you are an experienced sewer, 4 hours or less, including cutting it out, everything. I mean, it just goes together so fast and easy. And again, it's forgiving because if you're wearing a cardigan, if it doesn't quite fit all the way in the front, that's okay. You've got some grace in it. So I always think that knits are a great place for people to start.
So do I, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not so scary. In fact, there in our blog post that we posted today on weallsew.com, there is a link to a series of posts that we have on sewing on knits. So there's all kinds of tips on how to sew on knits, what kind of stitch you use, that sort of thing. And you can really tackle that. So, okay, next question I want to ask you is, what are the tools you can't live without?
Definitely my rotary cutter, but not just any rotary cutter, like specifically my Tula Pink rotary cutter, because my friends, the blade on that, I definitely cut myself with it. So beware, be careful. That's how sharp it is. But because it's so sharp, it like just cuts through the fabrics like butter, especially for like my winter sewing when I'm consistently cutting thicker and heavier knits. I mean, like butter. Definitely cannot live without that, as well as my clips. I normally have them actually right next to me because I can't live without them. And then, of course, your like fabric snips, because if Cinderella were like a sewist, I would be her, because I'm like always like, oh, is this a little, gotta snip things away all the time. So I'm like, I always keep them close by.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also a big fan of cutting garments with a rotary cutter. I like a 28 millimeter rotary cutter. I do love that Tula Pink rotary cutter because it has some nice heft to it. It feels really good in your hand. But I like a 28 millimeter because when you're doing a curve, it's easy to get around that curve.
Is that this one?
Yeah, that one. Yeah, I love a small one.
Yeah,
I love a small one.
Love that for that same reason. Yeah.
When you're trying to get around curves, it's really nice. So, but I would say like my absolute tool that I can't live without when it comes to sewing garments is my serger. Can't live without that serger. And I'm lucky I have an L890 serger at home. So
yes.
I know, it's fantastic. I do really love that serger. It's really fantastic. So it's an air threading serger. And so if you're, if you're a beginner, you might be thinking, oh, I want just the most basic serger. But if you know you're going to be investing in sewing garments and that's something you really want to do, you really want to buy the best that you can buy, because you'll save yourself, the threading. The air threading is automatic. The L890 has a screen. The L860 also has a screen on it that's going to set all the tensions for you. And you can just select your stitch type and everything's automatically set up for you. Here is a little video to show you how the air threading works. So we'll just press on the foot control. The thread goes in and your looper is threaded. So
threaded. Oh my goodness. I love that.
It's pretty amazing. But yeah, I couldn't live without my serger when it comes to sewing garments. You know, if you don't have a serger, absolutely, you can still sew garments. You can still sew knits without a serger. But it's one of those things that if you're going to be doing much garment sewing, you really are going to love having your serger at hand. So that's a big one. And then on the sewing machine, do you have a favorite foot?
So I do have a favorite foot, although I did want to add, as far as my sewing tools, I could not live without my projector. I am a projector sewist.
Yes.
And I do all of my adjustments on my projector. It's amazing. A favorite foot. So I don't know if I have a favorite foot, but I will showcase, because of course I've got my handy dandy case right here. This is the leather foot. Okay, so this one right here, so good. So I was customizing Jordans, and I could easily sew like my leather with this foot. And it was like, such a dream. Between that one and my number 18 button foot, listen, Christy, when I tell you that I didn't know that it was so easy to sew buttons, like I literally was never going to sew a button down shirt, a button down anything, because I was like, you mean to tell me that I have to sew these buttons on? No, not with this number 18. This number 18 is seriously a lifesaver, and I love it so much. Yeah. So maybe that's my favorite foot.
Yeah, that's a pretty great foot. I am a big fan of the 10 foot, number 10, the edge stitch foot. And if you have a 5 millimeter machine, there's a 10 foot. And if you have a 9 millimeter machine, there's a 10C. And if you have a dual feed foot, there's a 10D. So there's different versions depending on the machine that you have. But it's an edge stitch foot. So when you're doing that finishing, like you're going to do a little edge stitch around your collar, that finishing technique, that I really love it. And it's my favorite. I use it all the time. I love that foot.
Now, do you use it for like bias? Like if you were to do a, because this is not banded, this is like a little bias situation here, like a, Yeah,
you could. I just did a top like that with the bias on the top, and I used my 1/4 inch foot with that because it was a narrow piece, and the 1/4 inch foot just fit it just right. So I think it depends on what you're sewing and how much space you have. The number 1 foot, which is what most people use for their general sewing, right? It's your general foot. Yeah. The number 1 foot is pretty wide, so when you're working in those narrower areas, those patchwork feet are actually pretty handy for garment sewing too, because you can get into some of those narrower areas. And sometimes you use a 1/4 inch seam on certain things like the insides of a pocket or things like that. So I definitely use a 1/4 inch foot.
That's so good to know. Thank you for that bit, Christy.
It's handy. Okay, let's see. What's your most recent favorite make?
My most recent. I kind of feel like all of my makes are my favorites, but you know what? I actually I know that when we were talking about this earlier, I said it was like these Patterns for Pirates palazzo pants. They weren't made recently, but they are absolutely a staple for me, and I wear them at least weekly. But I recently have made 2 of the Henley dresses from Petite Stitchery, and granted, I can't wear them anymore because it's hot. But I need to make some in a cooler fabric, but they are my favorite. They are a midi length because that's my favorite. And it's not a bodycon dress. It's got a little bit more ease, but it almost like grazes your body perfectly. And it's so comfortable and you look so well put together. I made one out of a brushed waffle from So English. And then I also made one out of just like a kind of like a hachi that was a rust color. And they are just my favorite. I just love them so much. Very easy to make as well. So definitely those.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, my most recent favorite, I've made quite a few things this last year, but I keep talking about this cardigan. I also made it in a green velvet, and it really it looks so classy, but it was so easy to make just out of a nice stretch green velvet. So I loved it. I did see a question. Oh, there it is. I did see a question pop up about lingerie sewing. So do you have any good pattern recommendations for sewing lingerie for plus sizes?
So not for bras. Like as far as panties, yes, absolutely. Like I love the panty patterns from both Made for Mermaids, So English as well. I mean, not So English, but Patterns for Pirates and Petite Stitchery. Their panty patterns they also have really excellent bralette patterns as well. And actually Laura Patterns and it depends on how much booty you like to hang out, right? Like if you're like, I need a full brief, then absolutely definitely recommend some of the full briefs from Made for Mermaids and Petite Stitchery. But if you're like, you know what, I like a little cheek out, the Laura pattern from Laura Patterns has a panty pattern and it is excellent. Their panty pattern is so good. So good.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, if you are interested in sewing bras, that's a whole topic for a whole other day. We could go on and on about it. But let me tell you, if you ever get an opportunity to take a class with someone who is a custom bra fitter, that is absolutely the way to go. Several years ago, I took a class with Anne St. Clair, and I mean, she is amazing. She helps you get fit. She helps draft the pattern for you, and then she teaches you all the techniques to sew the bra. I mean, it's wonderful. And once you wear one that was made to fit you, it's like, oh, you'd never go back. Yeah, absolutely. So, we could totally talk about that a long time, but it's, if you can get a good class, absolutely take advantage of it.
I know that Nikki Griffin, she actually has one. She's local to Atlanta. We have like an Atlanta sewing group, and she's our like local person. I think that she does classes virtually too, but she does when I watch her make them on Instagram, I'm like, maybe I will make a bra, because I mean, she just makes it look so easy. And of course, like we know that reels, they don't show the full story, but I don't know. She just makes it look so easy. And I'm like, maybe I will. I did buy a couple of bra kits though.
Yeah.
So like, it's on my to-do.
It's on the list. Well, speaking of on the list, what is on your list for sewing for this year? What are you planning to make?
Christy, would you believe that I'm getting into quilting? So I do have some quilts. I know I've got some quilts. I finished my my first like official quilt top for my daughter. She actually helped me to pick out the pattern pieces or the fabric. So it's for her. It was for her 12th birthday. But as far as apparel goes, I'm really looking forward to making some of the shirt dresses. Like I am using the Closet Core Kaye pattern. And then there's also the Petite Stitchery pattern that I'm just like looking forward to, really like being in this like lightweight cotton, because it's so hot. And with all of the buttons that I put on using my number 18 foot. So I'm looking forward to really, really kind of jumping back into wovens a little bit more and having some more structure and really tailored looks in my wardrobe.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've got a shirt dresses on my list too. I'm going to make the Hawthorne shirt dress, which is from Seamwork. It does only go up to a size 18, but I'm smaller on top than on bottom, so I'll grade it to fit me on the bottom. And also, one thing that people sometimes forget about is there's ease in a garment, right? So sometimes, just because your measurements don't necessarily fit the exact measurements on the pattern doesn't necessarily mean you can't wear it, depending on how much ease you personally like to have in a garment. But anyway, back to the Hawthorne dress is on my list. And something we didn't talk about that we did talk about on Tuesday when it comes to adjusting is a tip that I learned from my mom, which is why I chose this size pattern to go with, is that if you are narrow shouldered, and I am, my shoulders are pretty narrow here, it's actually easier to start with something that fits you in the shoulder and then grade up in other places. So add a full bicep adjustment, adjust for a full belly or a full bust adjustment, but start where your shoulders fit, because that is the structure of a structured is at the shoulder. So anyway, I'm looking forward to making that. I'm also going to make a jumpsuit from Made for Mermaids, the Megan jumpsuit.
Yes.
I'm going to Palm Springs in July. And so I'm going to have something really cool to wear. I'm looking forward to making that. And I also am going to do a button down. I've been a long time since I've made just a nice button down white shirt. And that's one of those things, it's always good to have in your closet. So versatile. But I'm going to try something new this year too. I haven't tried it yet, but I do want to tell people about it if you want to give it a try. And it's a new app. It's called Fama. It's Fayma, F like Frank, Ayma, Fama. And it is a pattern generating software. So you go in and you buy your patterns in the app, and then you put all your measurements in, and it's a lot of measurements. I want to say it's like, because I started the measurement process, and it's like 35 measurements or something like that. You put all these measurements in, you take pictures of your body, front and side, and then it generates a pattern that fits you. So I'm so excited to try it. I hope, I really, I've heard good things about it. And so I'm really excited to give it a try, and actually probably going to be working on that this weekend. So that's something that's new. That's new for me. So.
And it's also super exciting.
Yeah. Isn't that cool? I mean, what a revolution that would be for people. And you can, when you actually enter your patterns, you can then order a printed pattern if you want a printed pattern, or you can get a PDF pattern. And you mentioned earlier about your projector. There might be some folks out there who've never used a projector for their patterns before. So you can tell us a little bit more about that, about like how would you use a projector for sewing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you can't see it here, but right next to my light is actually a projector that points down to my cutting table, which is a little junky right now, right? So I'm like, move my head over to block some of those things. But so you essentially take an AO style pattern, except everything is all on one page, which is beautiful. You just pull it up in Adobe PDF. And so I use an Apple, I have a MacBook, or rather, I'm sorry, a desktop in here, and I just pull it up. I screen mirror because my projector is connected via Bluetooth, or rather wirelessly. So I'm able to just screen mirror from here, and it projects down to my cutting mat that's here, and then I just cut my fabric right from there. And so you completely stop using paper altogether, which is something that is really important to me. For those that don't know, I'm a sustainability blogger, and that's something that's really important to me, is making sure that I do my part, even with my creativity, to do what I can in order to not create so much waste. And, I do my adjustments there. I love it because I don't only sew for myself, I also sew for 3 children as well as my husband. So it makes it so much easier to just go ahead and project those patterns down versus, having to print it off every single time. The other thing that it makes it really great for is because I do a lot of pattern tests. And so if you're, pattern testing, then you're having to print off every single version that the pattern designer is working with. And that took up a lot. Like listen, Christy, when I tell you that I used to order boxes of reams of paper, and one weekend my husband sat with me as I taped together probably about 10 patterns before cutting them out. And he was like, is this what you do for all of your pattern tests? And I was like, yeah, this is my process. And he was like, just order the projector. The projector cost like $70. And then the stand was like $10. So literally for $80, I'm able to save all of the money in toner as well as in paper. And it's amazing. Up on my Instagram as well as my TikTok, I do have like tutorials on how you can get set up with your projector.
Yeah, I love it. I don't have one, but it's on my list to do the same thing. I've got to get my space figured out in terms of where my table's going to sit. Because I actually, I don't have a permanent cutting table in my space. So I have to roll my table that my machine sits on rolls into the middle of my room, and that becomes my cutting table. But anyway, it's on my list. I love the idea. I think it's fantastic. So that is awesome. Elise, do we have any more questions?
No further questions, but a lot of positive statements. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences when you sew and you alter patterns. It's super interesting. From my part and on behalf of Bernina, I want to say thank you to both of you. And thank you, Aaronica, for keep sharing your experiences sewing on a Bernina. We connect our ambassadors to what they're doing, so follow them on social media. So that concludes it for today. Thanks so much for all your great tips. Any final suggestions from you to our fans before we close?
I will say that the OSQE is coming up. If you're in the Atlanta area, you can come out and see me. I'll be there with my Bernina dealer. You can come out and see us. And if you're also in the Atlanta area, I have a session coming up at the Pinners Conference where I will also be talking about sewing on my Bernina, as well as utilizing my Bernina, as well as the other Bernina products on how you can build out a capsule wardrobe. So.
Yeah, and I just want to close out by saying, it's well worth it to make clothes for yourself. There's something that's so special about being able to not be limited by your size. And sometimes when it comes to buying garments in the store, we are limited by our size. But when we sew for ourselves, there's no limits. You can make anything, you can make it your taste. And so I think it's worth the investment to take on some garment sewing skills. I think you're really going to find that it's worth it. So.
I absolutely echo and totally agree with everything that Christy just said. I did just see in the chat that Julian had asked about size expansive patterns for men, and someone asked about a dowager bag. I think this is how it's pronounced. Yeah. Julian, unfortunately, I don't know much about the size expansion for men's. I do know that I sew men's patterns from both Patterns for Pirates, Petite Stitchery, as well as Made for Mermaids, as they do go up pretty high as far as sizing goes, but they don't have pants patterns. My understanding is that Toby J is the most size inclusive. And I do not know about any adjustments to do for the dowager bag, but I can do some research, and I don't have a problem sharing that on the We All Sew blog if I can find something.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, you would be looking for like a rounded upper back. So, it's not always called the same thing, but if you search for a rounded upper back adjustment, you should be able to find something.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Oh, Dennis, that's a good question. Can all these tips apply to men's clothing? A lot of them can, because say, for example, if you do have like a larger stomach, you can absolutely do a very similar adjustment to, say, a full booty adjustment, where you're just essentially just adding a little bit more fabric in the front center, not necessarily the side seams. And that's what you're going to be looking to do.
Super. As Aaronica and Christy mentioned, check out our We All Sew blog for those who did not read it yet. We have a ton of great tips and suggestions from our very beloved and talented education teams and our ambassadors. So there is a lot to learn, whether you're a beginner or you're a very experienced quilter, garment sewist. There's content for all of you, for all of the creative minds out there that want to try something new or just want to enhance their skills. So thank you so much again. And until we see us again with some other interesting topics, Aaronica is very active on social media. She also hosted an Instagram live for us. So we definitely will see your face again on one of the Bernina platforms in the near future. So thank you so much. Have a great day and stay creative.
If you'd like to reach out to Christy, you can reach her at cburcham at berninausa.com. That's CBURCHAM. You can catch Aaronica sharing her new creations on Instagram at Needle and the Bell, or reach out to her directly on her website at theneedleandthebell.com, and Bell is spelled B-E-L-L-E. Make sure you tell them you heard them on So and So. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of So and So, another story about people just like you, people for whom sewing and quilting is so much more than a hobby. It's a way of life. It's a connection to something bigger. If you know someone you think has an outstanding story, a story that should be shared on this podcast, please drop me a note to info@soandsopodcast.com or complete the form on our website. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform and visit our website, soandsopodcast.com, for more information about today's and all of our guests. That's SEWANDSO podcast.com. And finally, I want to thank Bernina for making this program possible. I'm Meg Goodman, and I look forward to you joining us next time on So and So.